The bloodshed in the Middle East moves into Lebanon, and many in Metro Detroit watch, wait, and worry. And the debate stage this week belongs to the understudies. Can the vice presidential debate make a difference in a tight race? Today is Sunday, September 29, 2024, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. This past week, we saw a huge gathering in Dearborn as Metro Detroit's massive Lebanese community came together to call for a ceasefire as Israel expanded its military campaign to not only the south and Hamas, but to the north and Hezbollah. The gap between the Biden administration and the Israeli government was rather glaring this past week. There seemed to be an agreement on a U.S. and French proposal on a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon last week, but suddenly Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu walked it back, leaving the White House flummoxed and stunned. Just ahead this morning, we're going to talk about the worries for so many families, not just about the current violence, but about the worries over an ever-expanding war. Also this morning, we're going to set the stage for Tuesday night in New York. We've talked about our doubts over whether the choice of a running mate really matters all that much. But what about a debate between those running mates? With the race as close as it is, what are the stakes for Tim Walz and J.D. Vance coming up on Tuesday night? It's all today on Flashpoint. Well, as we've had our Mideast focus trained on Gaza, the explosions are now coming from the north in Lebanon. On Friday, Israel bombed the headquarters of Hezbollah in Beirut. It is a very tough time for so many in Metro Detroit with ties and family in Lebanon, and that includes my first guest, Osama Sablani, the editor of the Arab American News. Osama, thanks very much for your time. And by the way, speaking of the Arab American News, your 40th anniversary this month.
September 7th.
That's extraordinary stuff.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Before we get into the political ramifications of what we're talking about happening in the middle of this extraordinary election year, we saw over 1,000 people show up at that rally this past week that you organized. Talk about the human toll and the
I think it was
agony.
over 7,000.
Over 7,000?
That's correct.
Goodness. The agony of watching all of this from afar with so many people who have loved ones right in the middle of it.
Well, my family lives there, and my friends, and the family of my friends, and their friends. And therefore, we are really living a very, very tough time right now. And as Americans, we are very concerned that our government is complicit in this. When the F-35 carries 2,000-pound bombs made by America, and the F-35 is made by America, and America is aware of what's going on, they are complicit in this war.
Well, we watched this past week. It was kind of astonishing. It seemed that Joe Biden and the French, for that matter, felt that there was an agreement with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government on a 21-day ceasefire, and all of a sudden Netanyahu walks that back. It made for a very interesting news conference the other day at the White House. They clearly looked like they'd been blindsided.
Well, he has not been blindsiding anybody. He is coordinating all his efforts with the administration. Devin, we're not naive. What's happening in the Middle East is being monitored, financed, intelligence given political cover for the Israelis by the administration. This is something that we truly believe in. We have sat with the administration several times.
By the American administration?
Yes, by the Biden-Harris administration.
If we understand, though, after watching for how many ever years of the way that Israel reacts to any provocation, I had made the point on the program back when the Hamas war started that clearly it seemed to me that Hamas hated Israel more than it loved the people of Palestine because the ruin that they brought on Palestine.
That's
understanding.
Not true.
Well,
it is not true.
Is it not true that Hezbollah hates Israel more than it cares about Lebanon because it's only inviting this?
That is not true. That is not true. You know, we have been living lies in America and propaganda that says that Hamas is a terrorist organization, Hezbollah is a terrorist organization, they're going to kill the Jews, they're going to throw them in the sea. That is all
Well, they've made
nonsense.
It clear that they don't believe in Israel's right to exist.
They don't believe in Israel's right to exist because Israel doesn't believe in their right to exist. And they are bombing and killing them on a daily basis. They are putting putting them in prisons and thousands. This is a military occupation that has been going on for 76 years. Devin, nobody can take it for one day.
Fair.
Then you have to fight back.
I understand that's the point.
If George Washington didn't fight the British, we would be under the occupation of British today, right?
But to understand the way that Israel responds to things, to only you're now asking for explosions in Beirut, aren't you?
Well, we're not asking for it. We are fighting for something that we believe it's legitimate. The entire world believe in it. We have to live freely. Our people have to live freely. They have the right to live freely in their own country. The Israelis have been occupying them militarily, abusing them for 76 years, and then you tell me right now, Devin, that Hamas hates the Palestinians more than hate Israel. That is not true. There is no hate there. There is a problem there. The Jews and the Muslims, they live here. I have my friends in the Jewish community. How come we live here and we cannot live over there? Because here we are equal. There, one is occupying the other, and that's the problem.
You don't think what Hamas did last October just invited all this misery on their own
Well, what is
people?
invited this misery is the occupation for 76 years. And
I can't possibly litigate all of that.
But what do you expect people to do? Stay under occupation? What are they supposed to do? They're supposed to fight back. It is a legitimate right under the international law. You have the right to fight your occupier, especially if your occupier is oppressor. It is a given thing.
I understand this on a philosophical level, but Gaza has basically been vaporized.
Well,
in
the Palestinians will rebuild Gaza, and they will live free because they decided that they've had enough. And they have been living in an open prison for 16 years, that occupying. They withdrew from Gaza, but they surrounded Gaza and they prevented the air from going into Gaza.
I'm fairly certain you and I cannot solve the Israeli
well, we have tried
the crisis
in 1993, but it didn't work.
It's absolutely right. Let's though move to the political ramifications. Right. This past week, Abdullah Hammoud, the mayor of Dearborn, said that he's not going to that no one in this election has earned his vote. We saw, however, Amir Ghalib, the mayor of Hamtramck, throwing his support behind Donald Trump. Where does all of this, which is extraordinary for a guy who once asked for a Muslim ban in America, where does all of this lead now politically in a state like Michigan, where the margins are razor thin? What's going to happen?
Well, I've been 40 years in this business.
Yes. Exactly 40 years.
40 years. And I have endorsed Republicans and Democrats. On the national, local level. This is a free country. You can endorse whoever you want.
Of course.
You can vote. This is what's so good about our country. Amir Ghalib, Abdullah Hammoud can make the decisions that they want. But I support Abdullah Hammoud statement because I do believe that none of those candidates, major candidates, whether Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, they have really done anything to earn our votes, especially at this time. I can tell you right now, no one is going to follow any endorsement for any of these two candidates. I can tell you right now, I have been
no
doing
Arab
this.
American, you mean?
No Arab Americans and the people who really are our allies and our friends. They are very angry, and we are communicating with them. This is a very tough election for us. It's very, very tough. We cannot just, give our votes for people who are complicit in the crimes against our people. We've had it. That's it. We're done. Now, what I'm saying right now is we're 30 days away from the election. Okay, 35 days actually, and there is still a time for this administration to do something about it, and they can do something about it. Ronald Reagan did it, George Bush did it, George Walker Bush did it. But I do strongly believe that we have the power to stop this war, to find a solution to this crisis, but we haven't been doing it.
I want you to stick around and join the roundtable in the next segment, if that'd be all right with you.
It would be my pleasure.
Excellent. We'll ask them to join us here. We continue. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Don't go away. Welcome back. It was 1988. Republican Dan Quayle was comparing his political experience to the early years of John Kennedy. And with a withering, devastating reply, Democrat Lloyd Bentsen said this.
Senator, I served with Jack Kennedy. I knew Jack Kennedy. Jack Kennedy was a friend of mine. Senator, you're no Jack Kennedy.
One of the most famous moments in broadcast debate history, and yet seemingly less remembered. It didn't lead Michael Dukakis to victory. George Bush and Dan Quayle went on to win the election. So what are the stakes Tuesday night? Let's talk about it with Jason Rowe from Rowe Strategic. Jill Alper is here from Alper Strategies, and Mario Moro with Mario Moro and Associates, and Osama Sablani of the Arab American News, kind enough to stay with us through this roundtable segment. It really was one of the most famous moments. Jill, you worked on that campaign back in the day.
I did. It was my very first one.
And yet, maybe it says more about the top of the ticket. It didn't end up leading to this unbelievable denouement moment in the debate. So how important is this debate coming up Tuesday night?
Well, I think everybody thinks it's a lot more important than the typical vice presidential debate because this election is so tight.
Yeah.
And 15 million more people watched the first presidential debate, so there's obviously heightened interest in this election. So in the game of inches, a knockout or something else like that could make a big difference, but I have a lot of confidence in Tim Walz.
You're nodding your head. You agree,
Yeah,
Mario?
I totally agree with Jill. And I think that, you know, before these two individuals were asked to join the ticket, their respective tickets, no one really knew who they were. You know, so let's think about it. They have to come out and explain to everyone who I am and what I can do to help move the country in the right direction. I think it's extremely important. I think we'll see viewership up, and I think you'll see a real good, unusually good vice president debate.
In fact, by you saying introducing people just reminded me of another famous moment when Admiral Stockdale, Ross Perot's running mate, had to come out and say, who am I and what am I doing here? Jason, what are your thoughts on the stakes and whether this can move the needle?
Well, you know, first, I think because of the compressed time frame with these two tickets, because, you know, Kamala just became the nominee several weeks ago. Tim Walz kind of came out of nowhere, and most people had no idea who he was. J.D. Vance, not necessarily a household name. So I do think it elevates the importance of this debate. I think it's going to be a good debate because you got two guys that are smart, very able, and have a good experience in this space. So I have a feeling it's going to be a very pugnacious debate, but I think it's going to be pretty entertaining and substantive as well.
Osama, you were just telling me that right now you're ready to sit this whole thing out. Could something be said Tuesday night that would change your mind?
Not with the vice presidents.
No, it's not.
No. Actually, vice presidents are just, they sit in the shadow of the president.
Sure.
The focus is going to be on the presidents and the president. I think even the presidential debate, to be quite honest with you, did not move the needle. People who are with Donald Trump, they stuck with Donald Trump. People who were with Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party, they didn't change much. It bounced a little bit, and then it goes back into a very competitive. I think we're going to see in the swing states, especially in Michigan, probably the race is going to be probably on 1 point, 1.5 point.
Yes.
So actually it's there now. You may see some leveling here or there, you know, but it's going to go back to this very, very competitive 1.5 point.
Well, I got to can I?
Sure, of course.
I got to disagree with my good brother.
That happens on this program occasionally.
I really think that the presidential debate did make a major difference, and I think that.
A major difference?
Well, a major difference for Kamala Harris because remember now, they said she wasn't doing interviews, no one knew who she was, what she stood on. And on the flip side of that, she came out strong. On the other side with Mr. Trump, you know, with the dog and cat eating comment, it just people started backing up a little bit and saying, wait a minute, now we got a problem. Remember, Joe Biden was the old guy at one point and supposedly out of touch. Now it looks like President Trump, former President Trump, it was the out-of-touch person based on that debate. That's what I was hearing from constituents on both sides of the aisle.
And I would agree with Mario in the sense that Kamala Harris reassured people that she was capable of this. That's really what the question was going into that last debate. You know, when people talk about undecided voters, I mean, I think your point is the polls didn't change because we didn't really know what the vice president was capable of. She did turn in a good performance. But, you know, what I find interesting when we talk about undecided voters, we're not really talking about undecided voters the way we typically understand them. They're undecided about Kamala Harris. Donald Trump, after the June 27th debate, after an assassination attempt, after 2 conventions and a switch in nominees, the polls have largely stayed the same in all the battlegrounds and at the national level. Nothing has happened. So when we talk about undecideds, if you say you're an undecided voter, that means you're still open to Donald Trump, and you are just trying to be convinced that you can vote for Kamala Harris, and I don't think she's made that case yet. So we have 37 days from today for her to make that case, but the only thing people are undecided about is her.
I feel like that's exactly what I just said. I said that, people have made up their mind on the former vice president. Kamala Harris polls, she's polling these numbers because they don't like Donald Trump, not necessarily they like her. In the debate, she cemented some of these points, but then it bumped, her a little bit, and then it went back into the same race. Like if you see the polls, the national polls at least, and in the swing state, very, very competitive. Right? They're running neck to neck. And therefore, whatever happens in the debate, it's gonna keep Donald Trump's troops the same way. It may change Kamala Harris a little bit.
And that's what I think. I'm not sure. To me, it's not as much about undecided voters as it is about voter motivation. Are you really going to get out there and be at the polls that day? But Jill, the one thing I'm still baffled by is Kamala Harris is still not really doing a whole lot of outreach with. She doesn't do a whole lot of interviews. Talking to Oprah doesn't quite qualify in my book as doing a hard-hitting interview. And no disrespect to Oprah, I love Oprah, but you know what I mean. There are still so many people, to Jason's point, who don't yet fully feel like they've got her figured out. Is she making a mistake by staying away from open microphones and talking to reporters?
No.
Now maybe that's as a reporter, I realize
I don't necessarily agree with the premise of your question, though. She has to run the strategy that's best for her, and as everybody in this roundtable is saying, people need to get to know her, and that means she has to present herself and her message and her issues as quickly as she can on her terms.
Which is why Oprah is better than talking to me. I get that part.
But it's not that she can't. It's not that she hasn't served in public office for years. She's got a record. She's got a set of forward-looking proposals. And I will also say that that debate, there was movement in the sense that, and it's an NBC poll, right, that says that she grew her approval rating more than any politician, any elected official since George Bush in the wake of the 9/11 elections. People like her, and whether that favorable number is pretty much how the vote comes down, right? So there has been massive mobilization, to your point, in terms of contributions and volunteers.
No doubt.
And in the game of inches, I think she's starting to solidify herself on her terms around her agenda, her plans, her story for the American people. And look, Donald Trump isn't talking to the New York Times. Right? We don't see him taking it on, or frankly, he doesn't have a proposal he's talking about. He said, well, he might have a concept around health care. So some of this, I think, though, this is where they're brilliant, because they say, oh, she doesn't have any plans, or she's not talking to reporters. So they're trying to win on process, and they're trying to win by a process of elimination or dispiriting people so that they don't turn out. Kamala Harris is running her best campaign.
If I could put a little icing on that cake, because I think that was brilliant and well said. Donald Trump's been running for president for 4 years. She's only been running for president for about 4.5 months.
Which has its advantages.
However, to be in the polls where you are and only have been in the game for that little bit of limited time is extremely, extraordinarily impressive.
Jason, in fact, I want to ask you about that, what Jill just mentioned. For all the talk about the dogs and cats that seem to will forever be the headline of that debate, Donald Trump saying that he was working on a plan for health care. He's not the only one. Republicans have had now 14 years to come up with an alternative to the Affordable Care Act. Where is it?
Boy, you really changed the subject on this one very quickly. I'm not here to talk about substance. Listen, that's a whole nother. But, I think when it comes to Donald Trump, there's nothing to learn. I don't think there's a policy proposal that's going to change people's impression of him. Listen, everything is baked in as it relates to Donald Trump. When he does crazy things, it doesn't seem to change the trajectory of the race. When he does sane things, it doesn't seem to change the trajectory of the race. Going back to my, comments about undecideds, I think we are well beyond this being about persuading undecided voters. I think we are now turn out your base, both parties. It is feed them the gruel that they need to turn out and participate. I think the persuasion time is probably long past.
Well, Sam, I'm curious, are you going to watch Tuesday night? If you're not sure it's going to move the needle and you're sitting out the presidential race, you're going to watch?
We're sitting out. Well, I'm going to watch. This is my job. I'm going to be watching it, but I can tell you right now, if I endorse any of them right now, I wouldn't even make it to the House.
Right, we got to get to a break. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. Don't go away. You guys got my Sunday off to a very good start. I really enjoyed that conversation. Brunch is on me. We're all going out for pancakes. Thanks so much for being here. Meet the Press is coming up next. Again, you'll see the debate live here on Local 4 coming up Tuesday night from New York. Have a great week. We'll see you next time for Flashpoint.